So you just graduated cooking school and had your first shift in a real professional kitchen. Your chef screamed at you, you fucked up your mise, knocked over a pot of demi-glace, but worst of all, they made fun of your knives. Well, buddy, it's time to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, get ready for shift number 2, and get a nice hit of dopamine with some much needed retail therapy. Seriously though, your first few days in a professional restaurant are gonna be tough. Don't sweat it, it's par for the course, totally normal. It gets way better. I worked in the restaurant industry for 8 years, and my first time in a new kitchen was always a little scary. But you probably are due for a blade upgrade. The knives they give you in cooking school are great for getting you through those couple of years, but once you get into fast-paced restaurant, working 8, 10, 12 hours a day using your knife constantly, might be time to upgrade to something a little higher end. So I've got a whole bunch of knives here. We're going to talk you through the essential knives that a chef needs. Some different shapes that you're going to want to start out with, some you might want to add later on, and then a whole bunch of different brands that are going to be good for you as a professional. The knives you started with in cooking school are probably made from a softer steel. It's generally more cost effective and good for a beginner because you're not going to chip it easily. Now that you're in a professional kitchen, it's probably time to upgrade to something Japanese. The steel's harder, so it's going to stay sharp way longer, spend a lot less time sharpening your knife, but it's also going to take a bit of a sharper edge, and now that you're confident with your knives, you should be able to handle that no problem. Okay, so first off, what shapes do you actually need? Well, a professional cook can get pretty much any job done with these two main shapes. A gyuto, pretty much a quintessential European 8-inch or 10-inch chef's knife. This is just an upgraded version made using Japanese steel. Japanese steel is way harder. Like I said earlier, it's gonna stay sharp a much longer time. So you're gonna find yourself sharpening this guy way less often than your other knives. When I worked in restaurants, I had a Henkel's knife and it worked great, but I ended up sharpening it at least once a week, even more often if I was doing a lot of prep. My Japanese knife, I found I was sharpening it once every few months for the same amount of work, and it tended to take a sharper edge as well. Now this knife will do like 90% of the work that you need to do in a restaurant, from just big mountains of prep, handling 40 pounds of onions, to carving up roasts on a carving station, even during service on the line. This guy works pretty well. If you're smaller as a person, you might want a shorter blade, 210 millimeters. I'm a big guy, I'm 6 feet tall, my hands are not tiny, and so this 240 millimeter size works really, really well for me. I find it's a great daily driver, but again, I can use it for those long slicing jobs like portioning steaks or carving up a roast. If the gyuto is like the chef, then this guy, the petty or paring knife, is more like a sous chef. This guy's the second in command, and it's gonna handle all the jobs that the gyuto is not gonna do very well. I find myself using mine for cutting up veggies in my hand, trimming up potatoes or cutting fruit, any small task that's happening up here that this guy is going to be too tall and awkward for. It also works for smaller tasks on a cutting board. If you're just slicing up a tomato for a salad or carving a chicken breast or something to plate, this length of blade is very versatile, and this 150 millimeter, even a slightly shorter 135 millimeter, is big enough to do most of those jobs, especially if you're in a really cramped kitchen where you're sort of elbow to elbow with the other cooks. Having a shorter knife is going to be a little safer probably, but also just not take up as much space. When you're starting out, you might just get a couple of knives to get started and not have some of the more specialty shapes in your kit. These even make a great boning knife for a lot of butchery tasks. Because the blade's thinner, you do want to be careful around bones, but if you're just, trimming up a tenderloin or taking apart a chicken, anything where you're not doing like really aggressive work around bone, the penny knife's going to be able to do that super well. You want to get a size that's big enough to work on your cutting board, but small enough to be able to be used in your hand. For me, that's generally 135 millimeters. Now, most chefs, myself included, will take their kit way beyond just these two shapes. I can't remember the last time I saw a chef with just these two knives in their kit. You can get pretty much everything done with them, but it's really fun to get other stuff. That said, most cooks and chefs don't make a whole lot of money, especially when you're starting out. So you don't want to blow all of your budget and your rent money on a really fancy knife kit when you're just getting started. Start basic, start with these two shapes to get your kit going, and then you can build up from there over time. These guys really cover a lot of ground without breaking the bank. Now, as far as other shapes go, you can watch my other video about how many knives do you actually need. Hint, the answer is one more. But here are a few basic shapes that you'll probably actually find yourself using in restaurants that you might want to add to your kit down the road. First up, we got a boning knife. Once you've been around in the restaurant for a little while and your chef trusts you enough to handle those more expensive proteins, you're gonna wanna get one of these guys. Your petty knife works fine as a boning knife, like I said earlier, but this guy is actually designed for it. It's a more robust blade, tends to be thicker along the spine and along the edge, so it's gonna handle working around bones a lot better than a petty knife. It also has this specialized curved tip, which is really good for some delicate jobs, especially if you ever have to cut the skin off a larger piece of meat like a pork belly. An interesting alternative is the Hanasuki. This guy is a Japanese poultry knife. Now, it looks a lot different than a boning knife. This guy has a thicker spine and is even thicker behind the edge than the boning knife, but it comes to a really nice, fine, precise point. Now this triangular shape is really interesting. The heel, the back end of the blade is designed for tougher jobs, so it tends to be thicker back there. Think about cutting through chicken knuckles and small bones, that kind of thing. The tip is much more delicate. It's a much thinner part of the blade, and so it's really good for those precision jobs, you know, separating a chicken breast off the carcass, again, trimming silver skin and fat off of meat. Beautiful for that. This guy you can do larger boning jobs with, but if you're ever getting into, say, doing a pork shoulder and taking out the bone like with a tunnel boning technique, you're gonna want something that's thinner with a bit more flex. This guy tends to excel at poultry, fish, and game. Santoku. This guy is basically a smaller version of a chef's knife. There are some technical differences about how the blade's designed, but for all intents and purposes, it is a small chef's knife. So it's really good if you are a small person and maybe more nervous around big knives, especially if you have smaller hands. This guy's gonna be easier to control. Are you working a prep shift in a big kitchen? You need a Nakiri. This guy is a vegetable knife. Take a look at this flat edge. When this guy hits a cutting board, it makes a much cleaner cut than, say, a long curved blade like this guy. You have to rock this guy a lot to get a clean cut. This guy, you just slide right across the cutting board and you get right through every time. So if you got to cut up a 40-pound bag of onions into thinly sliced pieces for, you know, caramelized onions or French onion soup, this guy is going to make you a lot happier. If you got a lot of edges to cut, you need a Nakiri. Now, a Tsujihiki is a longer slicing blade. This guy is a carving knife, right? Yes, your Gyuto is good at doing larger carving jobs if you got a big one, but Tsujihikis tend to be even longer and they're skinnier. So they're gonna be able to get really clean slices of you know, prime rib. Again, think about portioning steaks. If you get a skin, a salmon fillet, this guy's gonna do it much better than a Gyuto is. So really, just think about working on big proteins and getting long, clean slices. If that's something you do a lot, you need a Tsujihiki. Okay, a bread knife. It's for bread. The end. There's a lot more shapes out there, but these are the essentials. These are the ones that in most Western kitchens are gonna get you through every single job you're ever gonna need to do. But now that you have the shapes in mind and you're probably figuring that part out, which brands should you actually buy? There's a lot out there, let's talk about them. For the beginner chef buying knives, there are two guiding principles. Number one, don't be flashy. Number two, don't break the bank. You don't want to be that new guy that walks in on the first day with the gold tweezers, and you certainly don't want to miss rent just so you can buy yourself some knives. Let's talk about a couple attainable brands that are going to perform like maybe a fancier knife, but aren't going to grow legs and walk away when you're not looking. First up, we got these Tojiros I've been talking about. These guys embody Japanese quality with no fancy bells or whistles. They're just simple blades, really well made, high performance, nothing fancy. They just go and go and go and keep going. They're also not quite as fragile as some of the fancier stuff, so you're gonna be able to be a little bit rougher on them in a professional setting. Okay, Tadafusa Hocho Kobo. These simple, modern blades are super elegant and very lightweight. They're great if you pick up a European chef's knife and you go, it's a little too heavy. These guys are, you know, if we got the three bears, these are the baby bear knives. Really light, easy to use, and they have a more limited lineup. There's only about 5 or 6 shapes, but it's great if you just need a minimalist kit because it still covers all the bases. Now, if you're in the mood for something fancier without becoming the rhinestone line cook, these are some that'll take you up a notch without going nuts. Haryuki. These guys make a whole bunch of different knives for us, a whole bunch of different lines and shapes, using machine forging techniques with the rest of the work done by hand. What this does is it makes the knife super high performance, reliable and consistent, but attainable at a very reasonable price point. If you like a more traditional Western style handle, there's the Goma, Mugi, and Soba series. All three of these are stunning to look at with sort of different finishes. Definitely a little more flash than the simpler stuff we were looking at earlier, but still really reliable and not expensive. They also have some with more traditional Japanese handles. I'm a big fan of these because it tends to put most of the knife's weight in the blade. And so when you're cutting, it does a little more of the work for you. And if you're cutting for like 6, 8, 10, 12 hours a day, that starts to add up. It really makes a difference for me. Fujimoto is one of my personal favorite brands. These guys, a lot like Haruki, they do the machine forging for consistency and affordability. Everything else is done by hand, and they really have that handmade look and feel. So if you want something that's more traditionally Japanese, these guys are a great way to go. I love this Hammertone series. Not only is it super sexy looking, but they're a little more on the rugged side as far as Japanese knives go, so they're gonna hold up better in a professional kitchen. However, if you've been hearing about this whole carbon steel thing and you wanna dip your toes into it, they have a couple of great lines. The Nishiji is a carbon steel core. Basically, carbon steel tends to stay sharp longer and take a sharper edge than the more basic stainless steels we've been looking at. But the outside of the knife is still stainless steel, so you only have to worry about this very edge, which can rust if you don't take good care of it. Now, the Special Forge line is super sexy looking. Just get your eyes on that guy. Gorgeous. But this guy is full carbon steel. This is about as much of a rusty pain in the ass as it gets. Again, super high performance, really cool. They patina and change with age, and so in a professional setting, they're really gonna change quickly and they're gonna become yours. It's like a motorcycle jacket that's been weathered for 20 years, but they're a lot of work. If you set your knife down and come back 30 seconds later, it's gonna be rusty. So you gotta keep a really close eye on them. Just for example, this is one that has had some patina done to it intentionally, but just having been left too long, the steel turned this really dark black color and did so fairly inconsistently. So if you're not a fan of this more rustic look on your knives and you want something a little more clean looking, carbon steel might not be for you. Personally, I love it, but it's a lot of work. The Croce Forge line is also insane bang for your buck. And so if you're looking for a fancier knife, but you just can't afford, even something like this guy's really, really affordable. Now, along your culinary journey, as you transition from a cook to a chef and pick up all these skills, your knife kit is gonna change as well. Chances are different knives are gonna catch your eye, and eventually it becomes a trademark of the kind of chef you are, the kind of restaurants you've cooked in, the countries you've been to, how you've taken care of your knives will definitely affect it as well. But no two knife kits are alike, and you can really tell a lot about a chef just by looking at their knife kit. I kind of love it. So here's a couple of more aspirational knives that you might want to think about further down the road. These might make great celebratory treats to yourself as a milestone. If you finally get your red seal and get all your hours, maybe you want to treat yourself to a fancy new knife. Or you get a job in that really high-end restaurant you've been dreaming of all your life, then it might be time to treat yourself to something fancy as a reward. The Tojiro Atelier are hand forged in the Tojiro factory. So while they have a lot of the same principles as the Tojiro knives, they are in fact handmade by an awesome team of blacksmiths. They are stunningly beautiful. They are made from the same steel as the Tojiro DP, but the forging gives them kind of upgrades them a little bit and makes the steel perform better. They've also got this beautiful Damascus finish, this kind of rough forged look to them. They have the same kind of utilitarian handle as the Tojiro, which honestly I like because it's tough, it's almost indestructible, and it really is well suited to professional environments. Another favorite that you see a lot of experienced chefs wielding is a Fujiwara knife. Now, Fujiwara-san makes a wide range of knives. This is one of his Maboroshi series with a more Japanese style handle. His Denka is the creme de la creme. That is the high echelon of Japanese knife making. But in general, you tend to see a lot of his knives in kitchens where Japanese knives are really popular and where the chefs have been collecting for a while. This little finger notch behind the blade is something that chefs just get as soon as they lay eyes on it. You grab the knife and your middle finger usually locks right in there. Chefs tend to pinch their blades like this so they get more control over the blade. And so this finger notch just feels like a handshake. It feels like the knife is holding you back. Now, a lot of Fujiwara-san's knives have this more Western style handle on them, and he actually prefers that style of handle. So that's what my Fujiwara has on it, but he makes some pretty beautiful ones with the Japanese wa handle as well. If you're considering something fancy, you cannot go wrong with a knife from Fujiwara-san. Hand-forged knives in general, like the ones I've been talking about here, are not something that most cooks start their journey with. They're just not the right option for a lot of beginners. But once you advance and pick up new skills, they are phenomenal. They're a lot of fun. They offer way more options in terms of the style of knife that you get, the finish, the steel, the exact shape, everything. And so you can build a really eclectic knife collection that says a lot about you and the way you like to cook. I highly recommend looking into them down the road once you've learned some stuff. You know, take a look at some pretty pictures online or come check them out and shop for now. But down the road, there's something you might want to consider adding to your collection. I think you'll have a lot of fun with them. If you need more help finding the right blades, head to our website, knifewear.com, check out some of the articles or chat with a real live human in real time, or head down to one of our shops and just come visit, hang out with us. We love talking to folks, especially if they like to cook, and you might learn a thing or two about knives. Otherwise, check out this next video and I'll see you there. So first off, no, it's just because there's a ledge and I'm just like doing that all the time. So I just need to stop doing that. Just stop being lazy and leaning on the table.